This is the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. I'm the Senior Minister, Meg Barnhouse. Welcome. These forums are conducted on a regular basis and have been done so since the church first incorporated in 1954. They are held to inform, inspire, and motivate. As anyone who has kept abreast of current scientific findings knows, we are facing a worldwide climate crisis. It is and will continue to impact all humanity all over the globe. Today we have a panel of political and student leaders to discuss the crisis and tell us what actions we can take. To moderate our discussion, we are honored to welcome Allie Tharp, Program Director for the Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth. Allie has held this position since 2017, and we welcome her here today. Welcome, Allie.
Thank you, Meg. So I am excited to be here. I'm a member of Wildflower UU Church here in Austin and don't often get to come over to First UU, so it's a real pleasure to be here and to introduce four phenomenal panelists on our forum today. So I'm going to start with Brigid Shea over here, who is from North Dakota and came to Austin in 1988 to start the Texas chapter of the Clean Water Action. Prior to that, she had been an award-winning journalist at NPR stations in Minnesota and Philadelphia. In Austin, she was a leader in the Save Our Springs movement of 1992, which resulted in Austin's historic Save Our Springs law for Barton Springs. Brigid, Brigid served on Austin City Council from 1993 to 1996, and her carbon reduction work won the TCEQ Environmental Excellence Award in 2010. In 2014, she was elected to the Travis County Commissioner's Court. She currently serves on the National Board of Clean Water Action, a member of the State Board of Texas Campaign for the Environment, and a former member of the Austin Chamber of Commerce Clean Energy Council. She represents Travis County on the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives and the National Association of Counties. Recently, she was selected in the 2009 Women in Government Leadership Program of Governing Magazine. Give it up for Brigid Shea. And we also have with us Council Member Leslie Poole. Woohoo. Leslie has been actively engaged in Austin community issues for more than 30 years, having 40? All right. Leslie has served on several citizen commissions ranging from the arts, downtown, telecommunications, and water and wastewater, as well as the citizen bond task forces for both the city and the county. So Leslie's many years of service reflect her commitment to the long-term social and environmental and economic needs of all residents of Austin. Welcome, Leslie Poole. Okay. Next to Leslie is George Wunsch, who is a student at UT studying international relations and sustainability. George is the co-founder of the student organization Students Fighting Climate Change and the current director of the organization's media campaign. Students Fighting Climate Change is currently working to have UT and President Fenves specifically acknowledge the climate crisis. Welcome, George. And we also have with us today Matthew Kim. Since Matthew was a kid, he has always had a passion for nature and for gardening, and his connection to nature inspired him to join the millions of climate activists around the globe today. Starting last spring, Matthew started a chapter for Students for Climate Action in Austin, and he also co-founded the Austin Climate Coalition. With the Austin Climate Coalition, Matthew helped organize the September climate strike at the state capitol, which drew thousands of people. Currently, he is working on planning the next climate strike for Friday, April 24th. In addition to his climate work, Matthew enjoys running track and cross country and playing the violin and piano. Welcome, Matthew. So to start us off today, we'll be playing some bookend videos of some really inspiring speakers, and then I'll go into a few questions with our panelists, and then we'll take some questions from the audience with time permitting. So our video to get us started is a TED Talk with Colette Pichon Battle, who's the executive director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy and was honored by President Obama for her work on climate justice issues. So just some light commentary on the climate crisis. I thought Colette just does such a powerful job of bringing in how connected this issue is to all justice issues. Particularly, I wanted to honor this church as a sanctuary church in a city that is trying to be a freedom city, a sanctuary city for immigrants, and recognizing the connection of these issues. So that was part of the inspiration for starting today's forum with Colette. And if our speakers want to respond to any of that, of course, please do. So I wanted to start firstly, Bridget and Leslie, in part thanks to your leadership, in a big way thanks to your leadership, the city of Austin has declared a climate emergency, as has the county. And we are in the process of engaging with residents currently in the city of Austin around different elements of how to plan for this crisis. So my question to you is, how can the residents of Austin and also the county engage in this process? And where do you see the most need for concerned constituents to be more engaged or to up the ante in our city planning, our county planning, in our adaptation to address the climate crisis?
First of all, the city is scheduling meetings around the community to begin this dialogue with folks. And I don't know the exact site, but I think if you just Google City of Austin community climate meetings, it'll pull up the schedule. So that's one piece of it at the city layer. But I think this really is a house on fire. And it is frustrating, I think, for all of us to see how so much of this is being slow-walked. But I do think the more we can make the conversation local, the more people can understand they have a personal stake in it. And for me, this was a big shift in thinking. I've worked for 32 years. I came here in 1988 to fight climate change because of Dr. James Hansen's testimony to Congress in the summer of 1988. And I never was interested in preparing for climate change. I always wanted to focus on trying to stop it. But I realized about 8 or 9 years ago, when just fearing for my children's future and all people, that we had to do more to prepare people to try and get out of harm's way. We couldn't just leave everybody to their own devices, which is essentially what our state Republican leaders are doing. And this may not be, I know it's not a partisan forum, but I have enormous criticism for how the Republicans have handled this. I did see a story in the paper today, by the way, where they are just now acknowledging that climate change is real and that because they're losing young voters, they have to try and look like the Republicans care and are doing something about it, which is why Trump mentioned the, trillion trees, planting the trillion trees. So that's one of their big areas where they're showing that they really care and they're really doing something about it. I mean, tree planting really is important, but if that's all they do, it's ridiculous. But that aside, the state leadership is just not helping people understand what they need to do to try and get out of harm's way. And so that's been a major focus for my work at the county. And we worked in particular on creating a model program for neighborhood-based fire drills. It was actually a suggestion from an official in Bastrop, which largely burned down in 2011 from a wildfire. And we worked for about 1.5 years with the Comanche Trail Neighborhood Association. And last March, we actually ran the fire drill. And then we had a professor from UT who had her class study people's views about it. So we actually have a scientific survey of the way people felt about it. And there was a real consensus that it was valuable. And one of the really big takeaways from people was that it increased their connection to their community. But I think it's important to talk with people about how this could affect them in their homes, in their neighborhoods, and what they can do to prepare. So if anybody is still in denial about it happening, when you start to talk to them about the threat to their home, the threat to them and their family, the threat to their neighborhood, it changes the conversation. It's no longer about the atmosphere. It's about their personal safety. And I've found that even the most ardent climate denier will say, yeah, I think our leaders should do whatever they could to help people get out of harm's way from wildfires and floods and all kinds of climate chaos. They don't acknowledge necessarily that it's climate chaos, but they understand it's affecting them. So for me, that's part of a really important thing that we can do, is begin to really look at how it will affect people in their homes, in their neighborhoods, and then what we can do about it. And then for me, the next step in that conversation is, well, who do you think should pay for it? Because right now at the county, we know because of climate change, our bond projects, which are mostly about elevating roads out of the floodplain and lifting low water crossings out of the floodplain, are at least $22 million more expensive because of recent scientific data called Atlas 14 that's overlaid the existing floodplains and has basically changed the nature of the floodplain. What had been the 500-year flood is now the 100. What had been the 100-year flood is now the 25. Some of you may have recently been notified that your homes are now in the floodplain. That is directly related to climate change. That new data was gathered from the mid-90s to 2017. And it's dramatically changed the floodplains all over the planet. So part of what I'm doing at the county is we're having our budget staff track every expense that's related to climate change, because I believe we should pursue climate litigation in the same way we pursued tobacco litigation and opioid litigation. The people who cause the harm must pay their fair share for it. So these are the conversations that I think we can have and that will help really bring it home for people.
Thanks, Sally, for teeing up the question, and thanks, Bridget, for framing it. I'm just going to kind of focus a little bit on the financial aspects that Bridget was talking about. We are facing lawless actions by the current administration in Washington. And so we need to step up our financial support for the kind of advocacy like is happening in this room, and I hope elsewhere, and I believe elsewhere, to stand athwart the divide that has been exacerbated over the last 4 years. The current administration is doubling down on its disdain for environmental policies, using executive orders and agency authority to avoid legislative scrutiny. I believe Trump is absolutely intent on burning down our democratic house, and for me that's democratic with a small d, because it's all of us. It's all of our houses. The planet is melting because of him. And the public is ping-ponging from emotional pillar to post, careening from anger to fright, dread to despair. That's why we're all here today, because the weight of that burden falls very heavily on our shoulders. I can give you a couple high-level notes about what we're doing at the city. Bridget talked about a couple of the things at the city and certainly the many things at the county. And then later I want to talk about what we can do together. First, at the top of my list is legislation that, it's the Kinder Morgan pipeline going through the central part of the state. I passed a resolution to authorize the city of Austin to join the class action lawsuit against Kinder Morgan. I understand that a judge may have ruled on that yesterday, and I think it went down. Of course it did. That's the plan for the corporate sector and the Trump administration in order to completely eviscerate our wild lands, our public lands, our natural environment, all for greed. On a lighter note, I would urge we electrify vehicles. The city's doing a lot in that category, but we're doing it for city vehicles, and we are looking now at trying to expand what incentives we might be able to offer so that the public can, to help underwrite or subsidize the purchase of electric vehicles for folks around the community. I personally couldn't afford to buy one myself when I looked at it. So we are going to be, and I'm sure I'm not alone. In fact, I know I'm not alone. And so, They sure are. And the technology continues to improve with each new generation. We're also looking at putting more electric plug-in sites throughout the city that would be free, and that will help as well. I want us to plant more trees. Don't cut them down. I know that seems kind of a simple one, but at the Land Development Code meeting, we had 3 of them this week. I wanted to make a correction to the text on an amendment that had been approved at first reading because the staff had gotten it wrong. In fact, it changed the intent of my amendment, and I got extreme opposition from the majority on the dais. There's 11 of us, 4 of us are supporting preserving and expanding our tree canopy. The other 7 don't seem to care. In fact, the conversation on that in flood mitigation was, well, if we can get another housing unit out there, that's the choice. And I urged that we not have to make that choice. It's a challenge to have open space and parkland and more housing, but I think this is Austin. I think we can do that. We are absolutely equal to that task. But do not be lulled into thinking that we will not see a decimation of our tree canopy, even with the amendment that I'm still going to work to make sure that that text is corrected and it gets put in there. It's a 50 by 50, 50% tree canopy across the city by 2050 is the effort. That we've branded it in hopes to give the intent of what that program would be, and I hope that it survives the majority on the council. But plant more trees and save the ones we have. And then last, I want to say, worry about water, please. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but I think I'll stop here and let Allie ask the next question that she's going to ask further down the panel. But please worry about water.
So Matthew and George, you are both leaders of a global youth-led climate movement that successfully mobilized over 7.6 million people around the world last September. The Youth Climate Strike movement, that last September was one of the largest coordinated global protests in world history. This same movement is preparing for a 3-day general strike from Wednesday, April 22nd, which is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, through Friday, April 24th. Personally, I feel that a truly bold and massive turnout for this April climate strike feels absolutely critical at this social and political moment, when practically all of the political victories that emerged from the original Earth Day are being systematically dismantled by our federal government. So, what can you tell us about the local climate strike and youth-led movements and your plans for April 2020 and beyond? What is your invitation to listeners for how to show up and support your organizing?
So I think Matthew will get, whenever he talks, he'll sort of detail the intricacies of what that strike will look like. But it is on April 24th at 1 p.m. And so the work that the organization that I'm part of is doing, really that we're focusing right now in preparation for the action in April, is because we're a student group at UT, we're really pushing UT administration to acknowledge the climate crisis and to acknowledge that they have a part to play in being a solution, because currently UT is one of the largest financial contributors to the fossil fuel industry when it comes to all universities. And so I think in the build up to the strike, what we're really trying to do is garner momentum, garner students to come together and to empower one another. And I think the model that we had for change making in the past was really focused on us relaying our personal fears to students and being like, oh my God, guys, this is crazy, you know, everything that everybody in this room more or less understands, you know, how severe this crisis is. And it felt like it fell on, you know, like on deaf ears. Like no one was really listening. No one really knew what to do, because to speak for students, you know, in this generation, it's every single day we're just being shocked with stimuli, just every single day, no matter what. And basically, it's almost a numbness that just is pervasive, because you're always working, you're always worried about this, you're always, your phone. It's like there's so much noise and there's so much to worry about. And then so when somebody comes up to you and they're like, hey, there's this thing that transcends all of that really threatens your existence and our society's capability to sustain itself into the future, and that's pressing, and the moment that we need to act on that is right now. And I thank you, Richard. And the moment to act on that is right now, and it's just met with this look of like, I can't do anything about that. I have so much to worry about right now. I have a test tomorrow. I have my future to plan about, and there's a dissonance there that isn't necessarily each other's fault. And so I think the approach to garnering that momentum for April, to making sure that we have the turnout that's needed to send the message necessary to Republican leaders in the state, to people in charge of our institutions like UT, is we're trying to come to our students and to just any people in general. And I think this is something that you can sort of extrapolate onto anybody, because I know not everybody here are students. To anybody in your life, is that sort of like what Bridget was saying, is that this is really something that in essence is a threat to humanity. It's just a threat to existence. And no matter what our disagreements are in a political perspective, this really all comes back to home. And that's the way that you make change and empower people to make that change, is to relay it back to, well, okay, I know you believe in this political party and this administration, but we're all people on this fragile planet, and that fragile planet is slowly being destroyed by the actions of like was mentioned in the TED Talk, of a small sect of people really just using this for privilege and for enjoyment and entertainment and ego. And so what we're trying to do is empower students, is to educate them on this issue and to give them a community to know that they're not alone in feeling this anxiety and feeling that so overwhelmed by this issue, and essentially just trying to, rather than scare them into action or just shock them with facts, just kind of trying to hold their hand and guide them into a community that's accepting of the facts, and exists in a certain paradigm of, this is really, really serious, and the only way that we're going to get anything done is if we have massive change, but we can't do that without, extending a hand out to somebody that maybe you wouldn't talk to before, to somebody that maybe you disagree with on some sort of level, but that that we can't make the changes that need to be made on a massive societal scale without one another's help. So I think that's all I have to say about that.
All right, thanks, George. I think George pretty much summed up our motivation as a student for planning climate strikes and going to different climate strikes. Just that kind of fear, it drives us to do this. And also just to, I guess, reiterate, the climate strike, it's going to be on April 24th. That's the Friday after Earth Day. And it's going to be at 1 p.m. at the state capitol. And even though our state legislatures probably won't be there because, it's not during session, you could still go to the city council meeting that Thursday, maybe show support. We'll definitely have people doing citizens communications there. And just in terms of, being able to show your support for the climate movement, I think this climate movement, this youth, it reflects kind of that time, the counterculture, like in the 60s, that energy, that youth, and this kind of generational divide that, the youth, like we want to see change, but the people, people are blocking our way. And I just think that if you allow students to say to speak out and also try and influence others around, because I understand, we students, we can't convince a lot of these climate deniers that, we really need to do change. But I hope that we can convince this next generation to grow up in an atmosphere that, we really believe in climate change. And so that's also why I think climate strike is so important, is because when we go to school, when we publicize it at school, everyone starts talking about it. And, even though like people, they want to miss school to go to climate strike, it also is just showing support that, there's a consensus that climate change is real and is a threat. And also just like in history class, we learn about different events. And I mean, even modern day, right, we have different things like we can connect climate change, like, Syria with Syrian civil war, because I think it's like 70% or 60% of their arable land just like went away in 2011. And, all the chaos with the climate refugees and looking forward, that really makes us, I think it just startles us. And going back to the climate strike, right? When we do this climate strike, it's not just for the sake of publicity, right? Because we students, we understand that as young people, we have a opportunity, we have power to change other people's minds rather than adults speaking to adults, somehow youth speaking to adults, and youth speaking on the media is more impactful and more powerful. And that's why we choose to do this outward show in climate strikes and, talking on the news and writing articles, because we know that this is the most effective way that we can get our message across that other people have had trouble doing, and specifically to people in powerful positions or in elected positions, right? When we're speaking as students, we're speaking on behalf of their like newer constituency, because I'm 17, I'm going to be voting this upcoming election, and I hope you guys too, right? Yeah, we hope to use that power. We hope people recognize that power and just in our voices. And going back to the strike now, I think if you all show up at the strike, you invite your family members, your friends to show up at the strike and make, even though people might not be there, just to make that sort of impact on yourself, committing yourself to going. Because, there's a lot of kids, they have school and, maybe their parents don't want them to go. But I think just for yourself to commit yourself is a powerful thing. And of course, individual action's not going to change the entire world. But I think that if we can come together and kind of create a community where we understand the struggle and we can get other people to understand, then I think it might become a more relatable issue, because the climate crisis is not just economics, just a political issue. It's a social justice issue, right? It goes along the lines of like social equity, right? Because people don't realize that climate change affects the people the most, the people who haven't done anything the most, right? The people in poverty, where in other countries, third world countries, they're the ones who are experiencing it right now, where their islands are going to be underwater. Countries are literally buying land on other like islands, right? To be like, okay, once this island goes underwater, we have a second island to go to, right? That's kind of sad. And that's when it's just a little bit. And so I hope when you think about the climate crisis and the climate strike, you're not just thinking of like, I want to just create some cleaner air for myself. I want to create cleaner air for other people around me and people all around the world. And I think once you wrap your mind around the fact that this is just a global issue and it's not just like a here or just in the US, then I think it will motivate you to act more and act more urgently too. Because it's not just a future event, it's happening right now, of course. And Greta Thunberg, she's like, our house is on fire, and it kind of is on fire. And so I think, that's pretty much what motivates me, and I think that motivates a lot of other students as well.
Thank you, Matthew. I want to just celebrate. Bridget got out her phone and put in her calendar April 24th at 1 p.m. at the Capitol. And you should too. So you have permission to pull out your phone in order to put in your calendar to show up for the climate strike on April 24th at 1 o'clock at the Capitol. So I am mindful of the time. If someone will kind of make sure we close when we need to. So I am going to jump ahead a little bit. But one of our primary goals for the forum today is for listeners to leave feeling inspired that they individually and that we collectively can do something to avert climate catastrophe. So I personally am someone who waffles between despair and adamant drive on this issue, and I've dedicated my life to it, and I think everyone on this panel has. So I want to ask, what's your message to listeners out there who still, after hearing what we've shared today, are in a place of despair or in a place of feeling like that there's not much hope for averting runaway climate catastrophe? And where do you find motivation and hope to keep organizing and keep working for the collective transformation we need?
Well, I'll just say a few things. I do think as humans we're wired for survival. I think it's in our DNA. And I think we can do two things at once. I think we can both, at a practical level, prepare for the weather catastrophes and the climate catastrophes that are coming, and simultaneously work to reverse it. And there's a great book. If y'all aren't familiar with it, I brought along a little show and tell. It's called Drawdown. And it's a collection of write-ups by the leading scientists identifying the top 100 things that we can do to begin to reverse global warming. And the number one thing, I was a little surprised. Anybody know what it is? Refrigerants, yes. I don't know if I mentioned this the last time I was here, but how many of you have had a problem with your home air conditioner and had to call a technician to have it serviced? That means that your refrigerant is leaking. The reason you have to have it serviced, generally, is because the refrigerant is leaking and you get it recharged. This whole arena is actually governed by a pretty strong provision within the Federal Clean Air Act, Section 608, but it's not enforced. So the technicians, I think, generally know they have an obligation to track refrigerant, to contain it, but this is a conversation that you can have with everybody. I was speaking to a Legos robotics group out at Steiner Ranch, and all these kids were all excited. And I said, how many of you care about climate change? They all raised their hands. And I said, how many of you have ever had a problem at your house with the air conditioning and your folks had to call the technician? And they all raised their hands. And I said, right there is something where you can have an impact. Talk to your parents and have them talk to the technicians, or you talk to the technician directly. Find out what they're doing to make sure that there are no more leaks in your refrigeration units. At the county level, this is part of our climate action plan. And when we started to look, all the technicians keep a handwritten log where they write down how much additional refrigerant they're recharging into the system. We have hundreds of refrigeration units. We've got 400 some buildings in the county or different sites. So that can cumulatively have a big impact, but nobody was really paying attention to it. So just by looking at it and asking the question, how much refrigeration are we having to recharge? The other thing is refrigerant is really expensive. So if you can stop the leaks, you'll also save a lot of money. I've also put forward a resolution for the National Association of Counties, which only recently allowed their leadership to start talking about climate change. It's a very conservative group, but it is the National Association of Counties. And I'm bringing a resolution calling on the federal government to provide assistance for counties to better implement that provision of the Clean Air Act. Most counties, or frankly business owners, are not even aware that they are financially and legally liable if they don't follow this provision of the Clean Air Act. And I think, I'm not positive, but I think groups can sue to enforce it. So this is another thing where you can look for opportunities. Costco had to pay a $335,000 fine, which is nothing to them, because they weren't properly capturing and containing refrigerant emissions. Trader Joe's did as well. I think most grocery stores are probably falling in that same category. So that's just one thing. And the reason it's listed as the number one thing you can do is because refrigerants are enormously damaging greenhouse gases. They are 1,000 to 9,000 times more destructive than carbon dioxide. So it makes a huge impact. And that's something you can do in your homes, you can do in your churches, you can do at work, and you can inquire with lawyers if there's an opportunity to sue a large company if they're not doing it properly. That's one thing. I think we're going to take questions at the end.
Just real quick,
I think we're going to take questions at the end.
Lori Iserlow for City of Travis County Attorney.
Yes.
She'll sue them.
So I wanted to emphasize a bit of what Bridget was just saying about refrigerant. The denser you build a city, the more air, in the Southwest, the more air conditioning you need to have. The taller the buildings go, the more carbon emissions are coming out of the refrigerant, and they are toxic to our air. Again, another challenge. Obviously, we need to have air-conditioned space, but there's ways to do it that don't totally decimate the air quality, especially meaning we don't cut down the trees, because a tree is going to clean more carbon out, is going to sequester more carbon out of the air than any kind of a industrial web-based type of a filter. I do want to give you two more things, and the first one is going to be a bit of optimism. There's nothing more optimistic fundamentally than planting a tree. I mean, can you think, oh, maybe the birth of a baby is also super, super optimistic. I'm going to have a little bit more to say about that in a little bit, which is why I qualify it with the maybe. Point being, you need, as a community, and I know that the despair and the fears out there, we have to find ways to nurture ourselves and take care of ourselves. And it might be a raised garden bed that you're putting tomatoes in and keeping the squirrels away from. It might be flowers. It might be you sow wildflowers on the verge of a highway to bring our beautiful Texas native plants back. And it might be planting a tree. But please, along the way, don't cut any of them down. We have to preserve what we have. And then I said I would talk a little bit about water. I told you to worry about water. We know that water in Texas is frankly more valuable than is the gas and the oil that has been the engine of the economy in this state and for a really, really long time, which is why it's so hard. I mean, the money foundation at the University of Texas comes from the oil fields. So to separate UT from its petroleum investments really strikes at the very heart of that university and much of the economy and why we're here in Texas. But I want to tell you real quick about a pilot test on a closed-loop water reuse that the City of Austin is installing in May at the City of Austin's new permitting headquarters at Highland Mall. It's essentially closed loop. And with a membrane technology, it's a $1.7 million closed-loop recycling system, and essentially it will recycle up to 5,000 gallons a day, blend it with captured rainwater, and then it's going to be used for everything but drinking. So it's not potable, but this is the purple pipe concept writ large. So think about that both in your home. Probably a lot of you already capture some of the water, like from a shower when you're trying to warm up the water. You capture that in a bucket and then you use it to water your plants. But of course, you know there's lots of chemicals in that water, so it's not as healthy for your plants as it would be if you were using rainwater. But yet, it is a middle ground. So there is a way, when we're worrying about water, that we can actually make some steps forward. And then we have a new approach, a radical rethink of the way cities and utility districts are supplying and managing water. It's called One Water. A couple of the names that have been mentioned here today are involved in the City of Austin, and I believe also at Travis County and certainly around the state, in looking at different ways to handle water, the way cities and utility districts will supply and manage the water. We're doing it in Austin. It's also being done in Pittsburgh, New York, San Francisco, urban utilities in Australia, Singapore, Europe, and Israel. And of course, we know a lot of those places have significant desert areas, and so it's no wonder that they are pioneering new ways, innovative ways to preserve and reuse water. So I put that out there as a little bit of optimism for folks.
I think the individual action that I believe is that everybody in this room can do, that has a huge impact, is really communicating the issue with kind of your network of people around you, the people around you who are your friends, who are your family, who you care about and who care about you, and understanding that, you have a sort of influence over those people have a sort of influence over you. And if you can refine the way that you think about this issue, that you kind of see this issue, and communicate it in a way that isn't hostile, it isn't attacking them, it's not shaming them, but it's essentially putting them in the same boat. It's saying, hey, we're in this situation together. We're both facing this existential threat. Our kids, our grandkids are gonna face this threat, are facing this threat. And our community is facing this threat, and it's something that I am deeply, deeply, deeply passionate about. It's something that I really care about because, it's really our survival that we're talking about too. That we're talking about. And so I think really drilling those points home to those people around you that, like I said, that you have those intimate relationships with, and continually bringing it up, being like, hey, I bring this up so much because I care about it so much. I want to know what your opinions are. Have a conversation about it, because you're never going to change someone's mind by just yelling at them, by just throwing all the data at them, but like by really bringing it home. And I mean, you can do that in couple with, everything, addressing your refrigerants, addressing, making sure you're using water wisely. Composting is really important, actually, because whenever food decomposes anaerobically in a landfill, it releases methane, which is a way worse greenhouse gas than CO2. And then once methane hangs out in the atmosphere, it turns into CO2. It's just really bad. Honestly, too, another really good one is instead of buying clothes from like huge brands and stuff like that, go to a Goodwill or something. Everything I have here is from like a Goodwill. And the amount of clothes that, the amount of water and resources that goes into making clothes, and the rate at which we do it, it's really ridiculous. There's so many good clothes out there that are a lot cheaper and a lot more comfortable and have a nice little story behind them. So it's really nice. And that's just like small stuff you can do, but I really believe that the most important thing and kind of what keeps me going is that we're all in this situation together, and whenever you feel isolated in knowing about it, that's really the difference between you and say looking at another group of people. It's who's conscious about it and who isn't. But it doesn't mean that those people aren't going to suffer the same consequences of climate change. And so if you relate those consequences to them and you say, I'm doing this because I care about you as a person, I care about your future, I care about my future, and I think that a solution is coming together and working on this, then I really think that's the only message that can sort of transcend this deep bipartisanship that we have in the country today, this othering that we do of all these other people that we disagree with and that we can just kind of cast out of our social circles. Rather than doing that, I think it's a lot better to sort of embrace them, embrace those differences, have those conversations, and be comforting, be rational about it, and just try to prevent it from escalating into just sort of this hatred, because it's really just comes from both people just want everything to be okay, and they just see it in different ways. But fundamentally, we all just want everything to be okay, and so we're all really in the same boat there. And I think that's really my message, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess I want everyone to think of the climate crisis as a one huge collaborative group project, right? If you are in a group project with someone and you're all getting the same grade, right? You're gonna make sure everyone does the work. And so when one person doesn't do the work, everyone's grades go down. That's kind of the same thing as this, right? If the US doesn't do its part, yeah, maybe it's 10, 15%, right? But that's 10, 15% off of the overall test. And if everyone doesn't do it, then we'll get a 0, right? We don't wanna fail. And when you think about it, it's not oh, I can't do, my action, even though it's very minimal, marginal, whatever, to the large scheme of things, right? We're still in a group project together, and it's still gonna make an impact, whether, you think it's big or not. And that's, I think when you think about that, you'll start acting in a way that, you're thinking about others, how others are gonna, be impacted as well as you are, because, we're all in this together. And when you can also just do small actions talking to your family members, your friends, about it. I mean, you can also just call your elected officials, right? Or not even call, but yeah, contact them. Contact them because, yeah, they're super accessible. Maybe you don't realize it, but I mean, all their information's public, right? You can walk to their offices, although they might not welcome you there. If you come up on unannounced, but yeah, email them. And I mean, I promise you, if you keep contacting them, no matter like how much they don't want to meet with you, they'll eventually reply, you know? And that's why I think if we're really persistent, although like respectful, not like we want to be respectful about this, but if we're persistent enough, I think we'll be able to do something and, you know, help our group project.
All right. Thank you all. So we have time for one question. Are you real questions? I'm going to give it to her. We'll just make it brief. She raised her hand first.
To whom in the middle here?
Yeah.
We only have, so hold on, we only have about 5 minutes left for the discussion, and so please keep your questions short, and the answers will have to be so also.
The title, I'd like to know the title of that book that you showed with enough time for me to write it down.
This is called Drawdown. And there's a website, too, where you can get all the information. So look up Drawdown, and we'll go over here.
I'd like to address this question to our two elected officials. Please address the conflict in environmental goals between planting lots of trees to save carbon and so forth, and mitigating fire hazard. Austin is the 5th most at-risk city in the nation for fire. So the more trees we plant, the more fuel there is. How do you balance those goals?
With regard to the preserves, which we have, we are truly rich in preserves and parks and creek sides, but the preserves in particular, they are not the place where the fires start. It's where humans are, generally, where fires start. And the preserves are not this, looming threat that people think they are. The fire department and the wildland experts all agree that the best thing you can do with preserves is create what are called shaded fuel breaks between the preserves and neighborhoods. So I'll just say that about the preserved land, because I know there's been some criticism about it, and somebody actually recommended that we clear all of them, which I thought was absurd.
Bridget and I are both on the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve Coordinating Committee, and so we worry about both preserving that land because it's precious and invaluable, but we also recognize that it needs to be managed properly. The shaded fuel breaks that Bridget was talking about are absolutely part of the strategy, as is clearing out underbrush, which is basically shaded fuel breaks. You make sure that the flammable dry materials that are underneath the trees are cleared out. What's more important for those homes that are fortunate enough to have been built along the edge of the Balcones Preserve, and that's what I'm specifically talking about, and Bridget too, is they need to use building materials that are not flammable. We are changing our building standards in order to require that. That's entirely possible to do. And then also to make sure that the kind of foundation plantings are also handled properly. So basically, we know the strategies, the tactics and the strategies that are necessary both to preserve that gorgeous, gorgeous tree canopy. Anybody flying home from any other airport flies over Austin and sees the gorgeous tree canopy. We have to preserve that. It's cleaning our air and giving us respite and cool and lowering temperatures in ways that nothing else can. And so it just needs to be managed properly and appropriately, and we do know how to do that. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a quick note. Any fire department, if you're outside the city, any of the ESDs, the emergency service districts, call them and they will come and do for free a home ignition zone assessment of your home, or a HIZ assessment. And it gives you all the things that you can do to reduce the potential for your home catching fire.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the time for our formal discussion. We're going to close with a video, and so we'll be showing that.
In the days running up to the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum, I joined a group of climate activists demanding that you, the world's most powerful and influential business and political leaders, begin to take the action needed. We demand at this year's World Economic Forum participants from all companies, banks, institutions, and governments immediately halt all investments in fossil fuel exploration and extraction, immediately end all fossil fuel subsidies, and immediately and completely divest from fossil fuels. We don't want these things done by 2050, 2030, or even 2021. We want this done now. It may seem like we are asking for a lot, and you will, of course, say that we are naive. But this is just the very minimum amount of effort that is needed to start the rapid sustainable transition. So either you do this, or you're going to have to explain to your children why you are giving up on the 1.5 degree target. Giving up without even trying. Well, I'm here to tell you that, unlike you, my generation will not give up without a fight. The facts are clear, but they are still too uncomfortable for you to address. You just leave it because you think it's too depressing and people will give up. But people will not give up. You are the ones who are giving up. Last week, I met with Polish coal miners who lost their jobs because their mine was closed. And even they had not given up. On the contrary, they seem to understand the fact that we need to change more than you do. I wonder, what will you tell your children was the reason to fail and leave them facing a climate chaos that you knowingly brought upon them? That it seemed so bad for the economy that we decided to resign the idea of securing future living conditions without even trying? Our house is still on fire. Your inaction is fueling the flames by the hour. And we are telling you to act as if you loved your children above all else. Thank you.
So that was someone you might recognize, Greta Thunberg, speaking to the World Economic Forum at Davos. And so those folks in that room hold so much power and so much wealth. And that's who she was really calling to act. But truly, all of us can act. And I hope today you feel somewhat inspired and that you have a sense of what you might be able to do after hearing from these amazing speakers. So I do want to just recap some things that were said. Well, with Greta, divest, pull out. Don't invest in any fossil fuel infrastructure. Pull out from Chase Bank and Wells Fargo. Also show up for the Kinder Morgan pipeline opposition. Talk to your neighbors, plan locally, prepare for climate chaos. Protect our trees. Let's aim for 50 by 2050 of a tree canopy over our city. Let's show up for the climate strike on April 24th, 1 o'clock at the Capitol. Let's vote for climate justice. Let's think about the small things and how cumulatively when we compost, when we use reused clothing, when we take care of refrigerant leaks, that all of this adds up. And let's show up for one another and talk about this. Don't be afraid, but act together with love. Thank you all for coming.
We want to thank our panelists for the day. Matthew, George, Leslie, Bridget, Allie, thank you all. For the moment, the discussion has ended. Our work continues. Thank you.
And we have organizations out in the community room and in the hallway, climate organizations, environmental organizations locally, where you can talk to folks and plug in. Also, feel free to ask our panelists questions. Thank you all.